Hi, this is Michael Waitze, and welcome back to ATP. Success in the age of AI will not come from a single breakthrough, but from the interconnected systems we build to enhance continuous intelligent action. As agentic AI moves into the enterprise, the spotlight shifts to data. Not just how much data you have, but how fast, how clean, and how well managed it is. Can businesses unlock real-time insights with the data architecture they have today? What type of infrastructure does it take to build a foundation agile enough to support truly useful autonomous AI agents? Shanmuga Muniandy, Director of Architecture and Chief Evangelist at Denodo, joins us to explore the data backbone of agentic AI, what it is, where it's working, and what is in store for the future. Shan, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Michael. I'm doing very well.
I got your name, by the way. Were you impressed at all or not?
I'm impressed.
I was pretty happy with myself. Okay, let's start with the basics. What is agentic AI? How would you define this? And how widespread is its usage already?
Very good question, Michael. Let me just start maybe to bring the perspective, and make it easier for everyone to understand what agentic AI is. Agentic AI uses sophisticated reasoning behind the scene, and is actually an iterative process where autonomously it can actually make sensings and decisions along the way. So if I then compare that with Gen AI that we all know, obviously Gen AI is one way, one question, one answer. So you ask a question like in a prompt, and Gen AI will actually return an answer in terms of what you're asking for. But in terms of agentic AI, there comes the part that there are multiple parts of the software which is AI driven, which is actually working together cohesively to understand the context of question and reasoning and actually making decisions along the way. And which is basically in many cases solving business problems or achieving a goal.
Can I ask you, was this a hard problem to solve? And the reason why I'm asking is, everybody's first interaction, at least at scale with AI at some level, was with either, Amazon's tools or Apple's tools, right? And you could ask it like, what was the score of the latest Red Sox game? And it would then tell you like 7-3, they beat the Yankees 7-3. And you'd say like, okay. And then you'd ask another question. They'd be like, this is the first conversation I've ever had with you. I don't even know your name. Do you know what I mean? Like
Right.
They would forget everything. So how hard was it to build? How hard was it to build this agentic side of it? Just from and I don't need the technical details, but just how hard was that? Was it a throughput problem? Was it a compute problem? You know what I mean?
It is multiple prompt actually, Michael. To look at it, I mean, the example that you just gave is what we typically say as a Gen AI question, right? So I want to know a specific question. So I ask Gen AI, behind the scene is LLM that's processing the questions. And it actually gives you an answer. It's one way, right? When it comes to agentic, there is a multiple questions that is in mind, and in this case we're actually solving a more complex, in many cases multi-step problems. Let me give an example. A self-driving car, and I'm talking about a full autonomous self-driving car. That is where the car is now having multiple sensors. It's actually keep on watching its environment in terms of the road condition, in terms of the traffic lights, in terms of the sensing, which vehicle is going next to it or in front of it, who's walking in front of it. There are multiple decisions that need to be made based on the sensors that's coming in.
Right.
So obviously it actually deals with a lot of data. And taking this data into computation capabilities, of course, you need the power to process it. But by the end of the process is that it's actually giving you a reasoned answer to take the right decision. Now, you asked a very important question. Is it very hard to build? The aspect of it is not about the LLMs or the Gen AI part of it. The question is the data. Always is the data.
And just as an aside, right? Whenever I think about how fast and how well computers process information, I think about the first time I drove on the highway, right? Because it always seemed like everything was moving really fast. And I lived in Pennsylvania at the time, so I was driving on the highway in the wintertime because my birthday's in the summer, so I had to turn 16. And it was snowing. And I'm just thinking to myself, this is actually dumb for the instructor to take me up here. But just the amount of information that you can process. And then when it starts to slow down is what I feel like kind of all these LLMs are helping us do in real time, is that they're slowing down I mean, they're speeding everything up for sure, but they're
Yes.
slowing down the learning bit about this in the same way that when you go on the highway the first time, it's nothing like when you go on the highway the 25th time and it's snowing and people are honking at you, and so you're just like, I got this. I know how to drive. Anyway, so talk to me about this data thing, because I understand this. Why is a strong data foundation so necessary for enabling AI, and how does that get solved, really?
Right.
Like, what is data readiness? This
Okay.
is the real
So
question.
let me come back to the example that you just gave me, Michael. So traditionally driving, right? A human, all right? So when we actually, taking an action, like in this case, driving, I'm actually consistently aware of my environment, and I'm actually taking a lot of inputs in terms of what's available
Constantly.
to me, right? That's
Constantly.
human, right? And
Yep.
that is how human process information. So obviously, if there's a missing piece in that equation of what I'm trying to solve, in this case driving, but it's snowing, I then actually fill the gaps or the missing parts with what is my experience, my knowledge that's coming into picture. Now, if I then take that into agentic or Gen AI in a specific area of computation, digital, in this case computers, is actually working on based on the data that is provided to it. Now, it doesn't have reasoning, it doesn't have intelligence per se to really fill the gaps with the experiences or historical perspectives. So that is where the data is so much crucial and critical that we provide to the computation engine, in this case the computer. The reason is the missing parts actually becomes what we call as the biasness, or in some cases the error, or in some cases the hallucination that we see and we hear in the articles and news every day. So that is why, I mean, coming back to what I just mentioned a while ago, Michael, providing complete, comprehensive, clean, and aggregated, and also as well as clean data is very, very crucial and important for computers to make, in this case the LLMs, to make accurate judgment and give you actual results.
So how do you get it clean, and how do you then get that data readiness? And again, I'll go back to this analogy that I did when I was talking about driving. Like, nobody had to tell me it was snowing. Do you know what I mean? I was
Yes.
there, and I
Yes.
noticed that it was. I feel like we're going to come back to this analogy, this whole conversation, but I knew it was there. The driving instructor didn't have to tell me, right? He didn't have to tell me to slow down a little bit, because it was just a natural thought that I had based on walking, to be fair, right? So how does the data stuff get ready, get clean, get prepared and stuff, so that those types of things can then get accomplished digitally, as opposed to, because to be fair, your brain is a digital appliance as well at some level, no?
Yeah, it's an organic machine in you. So okay, let me just try to dissect what you just asked, Michael. It's actually a very huge and large question that you're asking. Let me try to maybe put some context around how do we go about solving this problem, right? Obviously, what it means is that if I look at context of a business, an organization running, their business, if you look at the data ecosystem in the environment, the data is what we call as siloed. It's all over the place, it's distributed. And over the past few years, when organizations go through this notion of digital transformation, now we know that a lot of their data, they're just on-prem. Suddenly, a lot of them is moved into cloud, and its data is available all over the place. Now, the complexity comes into picture is that, remember, when we want to try to solve a problem, hopefully, and the best case scenario is that all the data is one single location. But in a business context, in a business scenario, which I just explained, you never get that opportunity, right? Because data is going to be distributed, data is all over the place. But the problem here is that when we talk about foundation, that is where the very crucial equation come into picture. How can I bring all this data together, clean it, and make sure that it's contextualized, which is what we call as AI ready, and then this data will be provided to your LLMs and agentic AI, so that the decision can be made. So, very important question that you asked. It is snowing. I didn't know. My instructor didn't tell me. How do I
Right,
know? This
right.
is the real-time data element. So, I need to fully aware of what's actually happening in my organization, what is actually taking place in my ecosystem, my distributed ecosystem, for example. So that information in real time coming to me, in this case, agentic AI, for that I can actually make use of that information to make effective decision, and reasoning.
I mean, everything I read and everything I hear says that we're producing more data faster than we've ever done before. This is why data centers are getting built in space for some reason, right? So And there's also data virtualization, which you kind of alluded to
Yes.
but didn't mention specifically. But with all of this data being produced and a lot of it being produced in real time, right? Because every time I do a transaction, let's say I'm an e-commerce company, there are millions of people buying millions of things with millions of credit card, all this kind of information all at the same time, and it's changing all of the data that I have that's already been existing. Right? Like to say anything is static anymore is insane. How do you keep up with all this stuff and then build all of this AI and agentic AI technology on top of it
Yep.
when at the beginning you said all this data needs to be
Right.
clean? Do you know what I mean? Like
So,
it's so hard, no?
so for this, Michael, we need to travel back in time, right? If I go back like 30, 40
Can't we?
years, and that,
Let's do that. Let's do that.
all right, the reason why I'm saying so is that the data practices that we have in our organization these days are still a very traditional data practices. By that, what I meant is, in the effort of us trying to build and centralize data, we actually built multiple architectural considerations in the past. For example, you might have heard data warehouses, right? And you might have heard data lake. And now we actually hear a lot of data lake houses, which is basically means that I'm actually trying to pull all my data through ETL processes typically, and I try to copy and centralize data. Now, one of the reasons why our data is actually keep growing and growing is because we cannot stop ourselves from copying data, replicating data over and over again. So that's one cause. I mean, but of course, I'm not saying that's the only reason, but that's one reason, right? Now, if that is the case, I'm actually need to wait for the data to be available to me, which is already date by a day, a week, a month, for example, for me to make decision. And that's the reason why we always look at the old data, not aware of what is actually happening now, which is the real-time data. Now, to solve that problem is where we coming in, for example, leveraging what we call as a data fabric. And this is a logical data fabric where you don't copy data, but you connect to the different silos, bring all the context of data and delivering it in real time for decision making, in this case for Gen AI or agentic in the case. So obviously the question that you ask is solved by having a foundation layer which is logical. You're not replicating or waiting for the data to be ready, but you get real time data for decision making.
So this brings up this whole idea of data governance, right? Because if that's
Of
if that's the
course.
case, and if you have procedures in place that are doing this, you don't want to violate those procedures. But like, what kind of data governance is sensible?
Right.
It's
So
and
I mean,
it's a big question, right? But I'm just
it
curious.
is, right? And it's a topic by itself. And
Yeah.
I do normally run workshops for 2 days just to talk about
Oh, tell
security and
me.
governance.
Just so you know, I had a whole discussion this morning. I won't say with whom, but just about about data security and about API security. And I literally said to this guy when we were done recording, like, I don't think I'll ever look at the internet the same way
Yeah,
because the amount of attacks on data silos, data warehouses, data lakes, data lakehouse, like whatever it is just escalating in such a way that it's insane.
of
Sorry, go
course.
sorry,
Of
go ahead.
course.
So talk about
No,
data
no, no.
governance.
You are right smack on that, Michael. So the reason again is that, I'm coming back to the same term that I used a while ago, right? When I look at my data ecosystem, any business ecosystem, it is distributed, is siloed, right? On-prem, on cloud, all over the place. Now that actually poses a big challenge for organization to say that, how do I control, manage security and governance of my data, which is all over the place, right? Now, one approach to it, and this is what we believe, and many of our customers are very successful in doing that, is that when we build the fabric, what if I actually put the governance and security at the point of data access? So obviously what that means is I become a central enforcement layer of your security and governance for whatever use case, including your agentic AI, Gen AI, and so on. So obviously it means that doesn't matter where the data is coming from, but at the time of you trying to access the data, I enforce the governance and security in one single layer, one single location, and ensuring the data you're getting is up to the mark in terms of what you can see, what you can use.
Right. So one of the other discussions that we had, and I'd like you to address this too, is the way applications are being developed today is different, right? And that this API connectivity to a lot of the
Right.
stuff that's inside of it means that instead of going through the front door and then rooting around inside of that data to find stuff, there are individual little micro applications that are getting built via APIs that then allow you maybe into the window or into some other way into this big data warehouse,
Of
let's say.
course. Of course.
And that makes it just like much harder then to control the security associated with it. But you're also trying to solve for this frictionless and seamless experience so that you can get, because if you want to build an agentic AI, right, that then has to access let's just
The
say an
data.
API in somewhere, or the data. The reason why I'm at, like, if I say to you, how old are you? You're going to tell me I'm 42, like whatever it is, you're going to know right away. And I don't want to wait for agentic AI to go, please wait a moment while I get authed and, all this other stuff. Like, I just want the answer. How do you
Right.
balance those things?
So again, so this is a very interesting question you asked, Michael, and this is the case and reason why the way of us doing it now, right? Many of organizations doing it now in terms of trying to secure the data at each of the silo level of the implementation of their data system, right? So one level of security at CRM system, one level of security at the SCM system, one level of security if you're talking about bank, for example, again, credit card, loans, and all over the place. Now, imagine a situation that I want to get a date, a piece of data, right, about me and maybe say my credit standing or my, whatever, right? Now, I actually need to go get data from maybe 10, 20. You're lucky if you're 10, 20, right? But you're talking about 200, 300, and in some cases more. Now, obviously, it means that I need to manage my security, my governance, my access rights in all this application individually. Now, imagine a situation that I explained a while ago. If I have an enforcement layer, in this case, I can be using an API way of accessing data, or even SQL, right? Or ODBC, JDBC, or even, for example, nowadays, because of analytical use cases and the speed required, people actually use Aeroflight, for example. Now, if I want to use that for the purpose of accessing data, rather than I actually go into this 200, 300, 400 application directly, what if I can go into one central location for me to have one unified layer of governed data, and that is the source of truth for me to use for my application, including agentic AI.
And that's great, but is that, like, how hard is that to do? This has to be one of the biggest challenges that enterprises are facing, right? Just getting their data into a place where, because like you said, like, this stuff has been being built for 30, 40 years, right? If you go back to some of the biggest companies in the world are still like 30, 40 years old, and they've been building this data for that amount of time. And it's been sitting on disparate systems
Yeah.
forever. And believe me, I've gone through data merges when I sat on a trading desk. It's not just one of the hardest things to do, it's one of the scariest things to do, because at the end of the day, you kind of have to have a little bit of a leap of faith that you're actually getting all the stuff you need and you want, right? How does that get solved?
Yeah. So this is where I started my conversation saying that, let's go 30, 40 years back, right? The reason why I said that is because we're still having this heavy baggage of what we started 30, 40 years ago, and we cannot move away from it. Meaning, I still want to copy data, replicate data, I still want to manage that way. So what we actually sort of seeing in the market, and where a lot of our customers are having benefits in approaching it in a different way, is that if you actually have a logical approach to data, first, I'm not collecting data, I'm not replicating data, but I'm actually connecting and getting the data, right? Now, obviously, what that means is that my source is not changed and it's there wherever it is. But when I consume the data, I'm not need to wait for a consolidation layer, which is a batch mode replicated layer. Rather, I'm looking at a real-time fabric, which is where you have all your governance security in place. But this is where we actually model the data logically. And that's the icing on top, right? I'm actually logically modeling my data and producing what we call, or curating what we call as data product, which is optimal for different use cases that we're talking about, right? If you're talking about banks, it can be a fraud, it can be customer service. If you're talking about healthcare, it can be patient management. In the case of supply chain management, it can be actually optimizing how my route management can be. Now, all this can be done by curating logical data products for specific use case. Now, what's the benefit of doing that? First, I actually gone away from limited or being bogged down by the need for data to be replicated first. Second thing, I'm actually getting real-time data, right? Thirdly, because I curated my data, it is actually clean and based on my requirement. Remember, I was talking about if I'm actually have an agentic AI use case, that is AI ready data for my agentic AI case. And finally, on top of it, this particular layer is actually securing your data, governing your data at the point of access. So obviously that means that it actually give you a checkbox in all the places that you need, ensuring that you get real-time optimal data, which is most optimal for your use case at the point that you need the data.
Okay, so this is starting actually to get really interesting. Let me see if I understand this properly, and tell me where I'm wrong.
No worries.
No, because in the old days you'd sit at a desk, right, and you'd say, "I need all this data to do a financial analysis for somebody who sits in the CFO's office." And what I'd have to do is I'd have to take that data off out of a data lake, copy it into a spreadsheet, do a bunch of
And you need to ask
manipulations
an
on it.
IT to do it for you, right?
Maybe, or maybe I know how to do it myself using visual, but whatever it
Right.
is. But yeah, I have to ask them, hey, can I have this data? And then I would take, but now I'm creating more data. And to be fair, I don't know if it's the most updated data because while I'm merely copying it, more data is coming in. And then I create that report for the CFO, and they go and talk to somebody on TV about it. But
Right.
I think what you're suggesting is that you can create a connectivity to that data that never leaves, that never gets replicated, but then you can create logic around how I actually take that data, use that data, and present that data without actually touching or changing the data, which gives it so much more power because just by touching it in the old days, I may actually break it. But in this way, I'm just taking a view onto that data and then manipulating it in an application somewhere separate from the data itself. And I never actually move that data from its reservoir into what I'm using as an application. Is that right?
Exactly. Exactly. And let me add something. You brought up a very good point there, Michael. When someone is asking for data, for example, you are a trader, right? You know your business very well, but you necessarily not know where the technical data is residing and how do I get the data, right? So that was the reason I said you might be possibly asking your IT to help. Now, the beauty of this fabric I was talking about in terms of the logical data architecture or logical data strategy is that the data is actually presented. Remember I was talking about the data products a while ago. This data product is represented in business language. So obviously what that means is that I'm actually letting the business users, right, may it be an analyst or may it be a data scientist or may it be an AI, scientist who is actually building the model. Now they can actually self-service the data rather than always need to knock my IT's door saying that I need this data, can you give it to me? So again, another benefit that users will actually benefit from.
Right. So I could literally say something like from January 1st, 2019 until June 31st, 2019, tell me all the buy and sell trades that I did in Toyota, what price it was at, and what time I did those trades, and then consolidate those things into me without ever actually touching the data and without ever actually asking an IT analyst to actually provide that data to me.
Let me dissect that a little bit further, Michael. So this is where generative AI, or LLMs comes into picture. So, for example, in Denodo, what we're doing is that we're actually bringing the LLM into the product and allowing that to be, your Gen BI. So obviously, whatever that you asked about, business question, I can just type it in plain language, right? And it can be in multiple languages too, right? You can actually mix that. And behind the scene, because we have the LLM, bundle in the capabilities, it actually can process your requests in a most logical way using the NLP behind the scene and allowing that to be used to go, basically, of course, understand the metadata of it and then go to where the location of data is residing and give you the data that you're asking for. And that is all taken care by this logical platform I was talking about
That is
from an
super cool.
architectural point of view.
That is really cool. Can you give like some, because right now I'm just like spitballing, right? Trying to come up with use cases on my own, but you do this every day. Maybe you can give me some compelling use cases of agentic AI that are already being used and I don't know, maybe in finance and logistics and pharmaceuticals. Just pick one or pick two. I'm really curious about these actual use cases where people are actually using them.
So there are many use cases, Michael. Yeah, so maybe just let me pick one or two, right, which maybe can make sense and related by many of us in the education space, right? So there are multiple ways, agentic AI and Gen AI is actually being used. And one particular example, and this is a very cool example where this is the time of the year, especially if you look at Singapore, for example. Kids who have actually did well in their exams, A levels, for example, is actually trying to look for what university I should go, what course I should be taking, and of course, they need to go through the application process and so on. No, that is a very complicated process because there are multiple touch points in terms of understanding where do I stand from a grade point of view and how do I choose something that is aligning to my interest level. And I need to have someone to really advise me because I do not know enough by just looking at the PDF that's available on the web or even talking to my friends or maybe lecturers, right? I mean, you have very small window of, of course they have open houses and so on where you can actually go and talk to them, but in the actual decision making process, you actually need a lot more information, and you need to have a lot, something like interaction. And that's what exactly one of our universities did in Singapore, for example. They actually used, Gen AI based chatbot, where actually now students in this case who are interested in this particular course, they are not sure whether they should be applying to that course based on their grades, and what is the complexity of the modules they need to go through. Is there something aligned to that, their future, for example, ambition in terms of what they want to become? And that is where this chatbot becomes very, very handy. And they can ask any questions like a plain language English. Say, for example, my grade is X and X. I'm interested in, say, for example, biological science. Is there something that I can look for? And by the way, I'm also interested in, say, robotic. Is there a course that actually a mix of biological science and robotic together, and I want to be applying to it? Now, just imagine if I am a student and I do not have something to base on. I always need to wait for someone, advisor, for helping me with that. But I'm actually running in a short time in terms of really going and applying for that, right? So this is where in Singapore, for example, this chatbot is really, really helpful in helping students to really find what they're looking for very, very quickly and applying for the course, of the choice based on the ambition, interest, and so on, right? So that's one example. Another example, this is a case where even in the case of our own company as well, when you go traveling, of course we all go travel, and of course in the travel process you have got a lot of touch points, right? Of course getting the approval of the travel, deciding the date, and you actually then register that into your calendar. What happened next? You need to then go to the process of booking, hotels, flight, and imagine this, right? If the agentic AI comes into picture, allowing me to understand, right? I'm traveling to this particular place, and maybe I might have a few other cities that I fly together, or in the same, flight that I need to go to. And of course, in all the cities, I need hotel. I need my travel, right? That need to be arranged. What about booking of those, different services that I need? And of course, payment of that is another element of it, right? And paying for the hotel, flight, and my car rental, for example. And at the end of the day, all this payment need to go back into my claims, right? I do not want to pick up all my bills and then start, scanning it in my, scanner back in the
You're already
office,
you're
and
you're already
I might.
giving me PTSD from when I was at Goldman Sachs. Just claiming my reimbursements used to drive me
Right.
crazy. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. Just imagine that all this
I'm
now
already
taken
imagining
care
it.
by the, agentic AI, whereby behind this, the different agents are working in cohesively to actually go and pick up my different requirements, my services that is needed, and finally it actually comes back and say that, all these bills that you acquired during this travel is now sent to your claims, right? And all these are automated. So that is the kind of, agentic AI kind of use case that we are seeing these days, right? And there are many more, but because of the time, I'm just limiting to that, Michael.
I love this example. I really wish that had been around when I was still working at a big company.
Not too late,
And
not too late, Michael. You can
no, no, no.
still benefit from it.
I don't want to be working at a big company anymore, but I can still benefit from the agentic AI. I was smiling when you were talking about the students and looking for places to go to school because the only thing that I had when I was going to college was the New York Times guide to colleges, and that was it. It was 500 pages long, and I had to just read through every potential college that I wanted to attend and see if
Right. You're
it was
lucky,
good enough for
Michael.
me.
During my time, no, 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 nothing.
There was nothing. There was nothing. Yeah, I get it. So, is there a way, do you think, and is this happening already, where there's all this automation that you were talking about, right? But is there also a way to use agentic AI to really augment decision making, particularly for big enterprises, and not just decision making, but even like innovation, where they can say, "Here's all these things that we know. What kind of new stuff can we come up with to do this?" Right? Is that also becoming
Oh yeah,
possible?
there's a lot of use case like that as well, Michael. In the area of design R&D, right? We actually see this very well utilized and used in, for example, car design, optimized, vehicle design, in terms of not only the body, in terms of the aerodynamic, design aspect of it. It also goes all the way down to the engine, the tires, right? How do I actually make sure that I take in all these inputs that I have to optimally design a vehicle which is going to be, helping me. I mean, of course, if you're looking at EVs and so on, how do I, gain the longest mileage based on my design of the car? And there's a lot of agentic AI and AI in use for that purposes. The other good example will be in the case of personalized healthcare, right? So based on who I am, my diagnostic results is coming in an ongoing basis, my well-being, the medications I'm taking, and of course, based on the advice that given by the doctors and so on, all this input actually is going into equating for you as a person based on your improvement, or hopefully this improvement, right, in terms of your health situation. How do I then change or personalize the need for their health, right? In terms of medication, for example, should I introduce a new medication or reduce a particular medication, or should I then maybe preempt that, if your lifestyle continues this way with this kind of medication, you need to be careful because you are actually, going towards a particular illness that you do not want. So how can I prevent that? All this is actually part of something that, from a healthcare point of view, I won't say everything is already in place, but this is something that is, in works, right, to ensure that something can be done.
So this is a little bit more of a philosophical question, but I was talking to a guy, I think it was yesterday, the day before, and he said he wanted to, even in the age of AI, he said he wanted to turn his company into the most human company ever. Right? And I think part of the idea here is that as much as we love technology, I'm happy to be talking to you as a human rather than just an AI chatbot, because there's a different sort of visceral connection between you as a human and me as a human, right? So as this continues to develop, how do you think the relationship between agentic AI and humans evolves over time? Because again, we're having a we're having a conversation, and if you and I were like, oh, we missed that little piece of information, one of us could easily go out and use agentic AI to get that information to
Right.
bolster our conversation, but we still want to have the conversation.
Sure.
I think, yeah. So how
Yeah.
do you see it evolving, just based on your
So
experience?
there's no straight answer in terms of, this is how it's going to be doing, this is what's going to be happening, Michael. I guess it's more of two main philosophical area of, how do you go build and, equate this into a application, and of course your business environment. Of course, we see more and more agentic AI, or Gen AI as a whole is actually being embedded as part of our business processes moving forward. However, as a human, you have actually always a choice in terms of your preference in terms of what you want to do, right? So, for example, I mean, of course, if I'm not very happy to be talking to a robot, for example, I can always say my preference, and this is something that is many of our organizations are very open about because they want to be ethically right as well as morally right to you as a consumer, and they actually should listen to you in terms of input, in terms of what is your preference, and then accordingly you actually allow that to happen. But of course, from a company's point of view, they need to look at it from a cost savings perspective and also optimizing the services perspective. So I guess it's sort of a a balancing act between what is the most morally and ethically right thing to do, and based on the preferences, right, and the likings of the customer. I guess it need to be something that is be a a balancing act moving forward.
What do you think the biggest barriers are coming going forward, and actually the biggest enabler too? We spent a lot of time talking about data, right? But what do you think the biggest barriers are, like in the next 4 to 6 years? Because there's also this other question: is how mature are enterprises in their ability to actually deploy all this stuff, right?
Right. So I just need to may bring back what I've been sort of reading in the articles by analysts and so on. There are multiple permutations that you can see here, Michael. Of course, one is from the skill set point of view, right? Are we getting the right skill in terms of bringing my innovation forward, right? But at the same time, looking at the development in the IT area and so on. There are areas, for example, we look at from architectural and from ecosystem point of view, is my data environment, my organization is ready to move forward. The third aspect of it, do I have the leadership support for me to really embark on certain projects like this? Now there are multiple again areas to look at, right? Again, if I look at coming back to the data is actually one good example of where it can be a stumbling block. So I'm actually looking at these are the 3 or 4 top, I guess, key make or break situation into organizations that moving into Gen AI and agentic AI. Now, how do then you solve this, right? Again, there's no silver bullet solution, of course, but organizations should look at it from a more holistic and open view perspective. By that, what I meant is that there should not be a situation where I see my data need to be ready for me to embark on Gen AI first, right? It should not be the decision point. it is always need to be an iterative process. I actually take a step first, but then I learn from the step in terms of what is actually lacking and understand and learn from it and then improve as I go. I guess that should be the step that many organizations need to take. But again, listen to the environment, listen to the economics, listen to the, I guess, the industry. All right, where is all heading towards, and what I need to be doing. For example, we know that letting AI go just by like that could also have a lot of implications, and we've seen a lot, right? For example, the use of AI a dark side or dark way, where it actually can cause very negative impact too, right? So we actually see deep fakes, for example, in over the few years, and of course, it's actually becoming more and more. And for example, we have been actually listening a lot of financial sector fraud that is actually caused by deepfake. Now, I guess it's also something that, from an organizational perspective, from a decision making perspective, we need to be fully aware of our own situation from an application ecosystem environment perspective. But at the same time, what is my innovation moving forward? And of course, in that process, take note of the skill set that I need, my data strategy that I need to have, and of course, what would be the the prioritization that I need to have so that I have the best and the optimal return to the investment that I'm having to that innovation.
There's a lot going on. One more thing, and then I'll let you go. And I say this a lot, and then there are 10 more things, but hopefully we'll keep it to this one more thing. When LLMs first came out, I think, at least for the general public, back in, I'm guessing it was 2022. I can never
Yeah,
remember anymore. Right?
4 years now. Yeah,
Yeah,
already.
it just
Yeah.
exploded, right? And you could see a bunch of use cases for them. And then you had all this generative AI stuff that people were talking about, and now we're talking about agentic AI. What are the things that we're not talking about? The things that you see potentially coming, but we're not talking about yet?
Right. So I guess even within this agentic AI and and Gen AI, there are other moving parts that we have not talked about a lot. Michael. For example, the equation of ethical AI. Right. This is something very, very crucial, very, very important. And of course, many organizations investing a lot in that area. But of course, that is now on top of it is equated with, for example, governments, right? From a public sector perspective, coming in with a lot of compliance requirements, guidelines, rules in terms of how we need to, deploy this application that is going to be most optimal from a security perspective, because we are talking about data and we are talking about PII, PHI data, which is going to be very, very sensitive. How do you exchange? How do you enable that open, exchange of information going forward? And of course, when it comes to agentic AI, we are actually talking even more, right? Because now we are talking about different agents talking to each other and exchanging information, making sensing, and also making decision based on the data. There's a lot of ethical aspect, security, there's security issues, copyright issues that's all taking place, and of course, not forgetting the deep fake aspect of it that's coming into picture too. Now, having said all this, I guess is about coming back to what is, from organizational perspective, from a readiness perspective, they need to look into carefully. One is, of course, strategy. All right, what is my AI strategy? What is my data strategy that's going to be supporting my Gen AI, for example? Because what we have actually seen in many organizations that we speak to is that immediately they say, yeah, I have my data lake and data warehouse ready, and I'm ready for Gen AI. It might not be that simple, because what we actually seeing is that that is the works of, for the needs of BI requirement and your traditional analytics requirements. It might not be optimal for your Gen AI, agentic AI requirements, but the change need to be there, right? How do I innovate my environment to make sure that I also need to move forward strongly, marching forward strongly, with the benefit that I'm actually get from the implementation and innovating into agentic AI by embedding them as part of my business process. So, those are some of the elements that we need to take care while we actually looking at, reaping the benefit. But these are the fundamental elements that we need to take care to ensure that we are actually going in the right direction.
That's amazing. Shanmuga Muniandy, Director of Architecture and Chief Evangelist at Denodo. We're going to have you back on again because this topic cannot be completely discussed in 40 minutes or 45 minutes. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for doing this.
I'll be more than happy to come back, Michael. This is a very interesting topic, very close to my heart. And of course, thank you very much, Michael, for giving me the opportunity to be with you today to discuss about this. As I said, I'll be more than happy to come back. Let me know what topic you want to talk about, and we can go deeper, dig deeper.
Awesome.
Yeah, and on behalf of Denodo, thank you very much, Michael.